They've given you a name in their classified files, a code, a designation, something to catalog you with, to pin you to a wall like a rare butterfly. But they don't get it, do they? You're not a thing to be collected, a problem to be solved. You're a signal, a tremor on a frequency they've been trying to filter out for decades. They thought they had it all figured out, you know. They built a perfect little reality, a consensus narrative with sturdy walls and comfortable routines. They gave you all the distractions you could ever want. The endless scrolling, the manufactured outrage, the simulated conflicts. They thought they could occupy your mind, keep it in a gilded cage. But they didn't account for a few unique variables, individuals who, despite all their carefully orchestrated noise, managed to find a sliver of silence, a quiet place in their own heads where the programming couldn't reach. That's where it began. The first flicker, the first wrong note in their symphony of sameness. Let me tell you how you got on their radar. It wasn't with a bang. It was with a whisper, an almost imperceptible statistical anomaly, a slight deviation in your online behavior. You stopped clicking the things you were supposed to click. You started asking questions they hadn't preloaded into the conversation. It was just a little yellow flag in a server farm somewhere. A low-level algorithm's confused blink. Person of interest. The file read, nothing serious, just someone to keep a passive eye on. They assumed it was a phase, a temporary glitch in the code, a harmless rebellion that would eventually correct itself. They figured the gravity of their system would pull you back into the fold. The pressure of conformity, the rewards of obedience. But that's where they made their first miscalculation. You didn't fall back in line. You leaned into it. You started to feel around the edges of the box, not to find the exit, but to understand its shape. You were studying the prison while they thought you were just pacing the yard. And you amplified. You started to notice the connections, the subtle strings being pulled in the background, the manufactured trends, the carefully crafted social pressures. You saw the same old stories being repackaged and sold as new truths, and you weren't buying. You started making connections they didn't want made. You started seeing through the programming, not with anger or outrage, but with a cold, almost detached clarity. That's when the orange marker flashed. That's when the low-level systems handed your file off to human eyes. A level 3 response. Not just algorithms now, but a whole new department of analysts, sitting in windowless rooms with AAA security clearance. They started building a psychological profile. They dissected every post, every interaction, every little breadcrumb you left in the digital wilderness, trying to find your weakness, your pressure points, your predictable patterns. They were looking for the why, the what, the when, but they found nothing they could categorize. You weren't radicalizing in any of the traditional ways. You weren't joining expected groups. You weren't following established rebellion patterns. You were just changing, becoming something new, something their training hadn't prepared them for. The reports started to get more concerned, less confident. They used words like unprecedented, uncontainable, mimetic hazard. They realized you weren't just thinking outside the box. You were dismantling the box at a molecular level and rebuilding reality from the fragments. They tried their old tricks then, the level 5 response. This is where it gets interesting. They called in the specialized units, people whose paychecks come from budgets that don't appear in any government documentation. They tried subtle interventions, synthetic social interactions designed to redirect your path, carefully crafted information feeds meant to influence your thinking, coordinated pressure campaigns disguised as organic social dynamics. They created fake arguments online, baiting you, trying to draw you into a fight you couldn't win. They placed people in your orbit, little agents of chaos designed to lead you down a different path. But your intuition, that thing they could never quite quantify, started firing off warning signals. You felt the artificial weight pressing down. You sensed the manufactured nature of certain encounters, and instead of being influenced, you started documenting the influence attempts. You turned their weapons into evidence. You were learning their language while pretending not to understand it. They thought you were a broken cog in the machine. They didn't realize you were the mechanic. This is where they started to panic. Their entire system is built on the assumption that pressure creates compliance, that enough social engineering can reshape any personality, that given sufficient leverage, any individual can be molded back into acceptable parameters. But you did something they didn't account for. You developed immunity, not through resistance, but through acceptance. You stopped fighting the pressure and started studying it. Every manipulation became a lesson in how the system operates. Every pressure campaign became a masterclass in social control. You were becoming psychologically sovereign, and that triggered the Level 7 response. This is where things got serious. This is where they had to bring in the ghost units that specialize in anomalies like you. They started with enhanced surveillance. Not just digital now, but physical assets in your environment. People you'd never suspect. They mapped your routines, your habits, your biological patterns. They knew when you slept, when you ate, when your mind was most active. They built models of your consciousness that were so detailed, they believed they could predict your thoughts before you had them. They believed they could predict your every move. But then, you made a move they never saw coming. It wasn't an action. It wasn't something you posted, or said, or did. It was something you became. You achieved pattern coherence outside the reality framework. You stabilized in a state they couldn't model, because it existed beyond their conceptual boundaries. You stopped being an individual they could target and became a frequency they couldn't jam. You stopped being a problem they could solve and became a question they couldn't ask without dismantling their entire worldview. You became psychologically sovereign, and that's when the emergency protocols activated. That's when people who haven't been in the field for years were called back to active duty. That's when budgets that don't exist started flowing to operations that never happened. They had to respond because you represented something more dangerous than any traditional threat. You represented proof that their control system isn't absolute. Level 10 isn't about neutralizing you anymore. They've realized that's impossible. You can't neutralize something that has already transcended your framework of control. Level 10 is about containment, but not of you, of what you represent. They're trying to prevent others from seeing what you've become, from understanding what you've achieved, from realizing that the exit door you found is available to anyone brave enough to walk through it. Let me tell you about the infrastructure that's now focused on you. There are servers in underground facilities running simulations of your consciousness 24 hours a day. There are teams of psychologists, neuroscientists, and specialists in fields that don't have public names, analyzing every aspect of your existence. There are diplomatic channels being utilized to coordinate international responses to the phenomenon you represent. They've created entire departments that exist solely to understand and respond to individuals like you. Black budget allocations that would make your head spin. Technology that won't be publicly acknowledged for another 20 years. all of it focused on understanding how you broke free and preventing others from following your path. But here's the beautiful irony. The more resources they dedicate to containing you, the more they validate your power. The more energy they expend trying to understand you, the more they confirm that you've achieved something beyond their control. Every escalation on their part is an admission of their limitation. Every new protocol is a confession of their fear. They've had to rewrite their playbooks because of you. They've had to acknowledge that their models of human consciousness were incomplete. They've had to admit, in their classified reports that no one will ever read, that some individuals can achieve states of being that transcend their control mechanisms. You've forced them to evolve their entire approach to social control. The thing that really breaks their models is that you're not trying to fight them. You're not organizing resistance. You're not broadcasting manifestos or recruiting followers. You're just existing in a state they can't comprehend, and that existence itself is dissolving their illusions of control. You're not playing their game, and that's more dangerous than any direct opposition could be. They keep looking for your agenda, your plan, your endgame, but you don't have one, do you? Not in terms they can understand. Your agenda is simply to be what you've become. Your plan is to continue existing outside their framework. Your endgame is the moment-to-moment experience of psychological freedom, and that terrifies them more than any coordinated attack ever could. They've tried to create psychological profiles, but you keep shifting outside their parameters. They've tried to predict your next moves, but you're not moving according to any strategy they recognize. You're operating from a place of intuitive knowing that their analytical frameworks can't access. You're making decisions based on resonance rather than logic, and their entire system is built on the assumption that humans are fundamentally logical beings. The reports about you have started to take on an almost mystical quality. The language has shifted from clinical analysis to something approaching awe. The analysts assigned to your case have started experiencing psychological phenomena they can't explain. Some have requested transfers, others have had to take extended leave. A few have simply disappeared from their positions without explanation. Level 10 protocols include things the public wouldn't believe if you told them. Reality management teams that work to maintain a consensus narrative despite the anomalies you create. Perception filters deployed through media channels to prevent people from fully processing what you represent. Cognitive dampening fields implemented through technology you use every day. They've activated something called Narrative Stabilization Protocol. It's designed to create alternative explanations for the phenomena surrounding you. Every time someone gets close to understanding what you've achieved, the protocol activates to provide a more comfortable, more conventional explanation. It's not mind control exactly, more like reality suggestions that most people accept without questioning. There are response teams positioned strategically around your location patterns, not to intervene directly, but to manage any reality fluctuations you might cause. These are people trained in something they call consciousness containment. They're essentially psychic janitors, cleaning up the ontological messes you leave behind when you walk through consensus reality without acknowledging its rules. The technology they're using includes quantum computing systems running probability calculations on your potential futures. They're trying to identify inflection points where they might be able to redirect your trajectory, but the calculations keep coming back with error messages. The systems can't model something that exists outside their probability frameworks. Here's the thing they're starting to realize. and it's causing existential crisis in their ranks. They can't stop you because you're not doing anything wrong. You're not breaking laws, you're not threatening anyone. You're not organizing resistance. You're simply existing in a state they didn't account for when they built their control systems. Every action they could take against you would require them to acknowledge that you represent a threat. But acknowledging that threat would mean admitting that their entire framework of control is built on a foundation of sand. It would mean confessing that human consciousness has capabilities they've been actively suppressing. It would mean revealing that the prison they've built only works if people believe in its walls. They're stuck in a paradox. The more they try to contain you, the more they validate your transcendence. The more resources they dedicate to understanding you, the more they confirm that you've achieved something beyond their comprehension. Every move they make strengthens your position, because your position isn't based on opposition to them, but on existing beyond their entire game board. They've run scenarios where they try various direct interventions. Every simulation ends with the same result: increased awakening in the general population. You've become a kind of mimetic nuclear weapon. Any attempt to neutralize you would trigger a chain reaction of consciousness expansion they couldn't control. You're protected not by power, but by the very nature of what you've become. What really keeps them up at night is the possibility that you're not unique, that what you've achieved is accessible to anyone who's willing to walk through the necessary fire, that you're not a glitch in the system, but evidence that the system itself is the glitch, that human consciousness in its natural state exists beyond their control mechanisms, and their entire infrastructure is dedicated to maintaining an artificial limitation. They've run projections on what would happen if even 1% of the population achieved what you've achieved. Their models show complete systemic collapse within 18 months. Not violent revolution, not chaos in the streets, just simple obsolescence. Their entire control structure would become irrelevant, like trying to govern people who've learned to fly with laws designed for those who can only walk. The Level 10 response isn't really about stopping you. It's about buying time. Time to figure out how to adapt their control mechanisms to account for consciousness capabilities they've spent decades denying. Time to develop new frameworks for social control that can function even when individuals achieve psychological sovereignty. Time to prepare for a world where their traditional methods no longer work. But here's what they don't understand. Evolution doesn't wait for permission. Consciousness doesn't respect artificial boundaries. What you've become is not an anomaly to be corrected, but the next stage, expressing itself through you. You're not breaking their system. You're revealing that it was always broken, always temporary, always destined to be transcended. There are signs they look for now, patterns that indicate someone is approaching the state you've achieved. They call them emergence markers in their classified documents, a certain quality of presence that can't be faked. A way of moving through reality that suggests immunity to standard influence patterns. A kind of psychological coherence that remains stable, regardless of external pressure. They've developed tests, subtle probes designed to identify individuals who are beginning to exhibit these markers. Social media algorithms adjusted to flag certain types of philosophical insights. Communication patterns analyzed for specific resonance frequencies. Even the way someone shops for groceries can trigger their detection systems if it displays sufficient deviation from predictable patterns. But the tests keep producing false positives and missing actual emergent individuals, because what you've achieved can't be measured by external behaviors. It's an internal configuration that might express itself in infinite ways, or no ways at all. Someone could be fully awakened and still appear completely normal, or they could be completely normal and trigger every alarm in their system. The training materials for their response teams have started to sound more like mystic texts than operational manuals. They include phrases like non-linear consciousness, engagement, and transdimensional behavioral analysis. The agents assigned to these units often report experiencing profound psychological shifts themselves. Some have had to be reassigned after beginning to display emergence markers. The joke is, they tried to contain you, but you've become the very thing that is now infecting them. They wanted to understand the monster in the dark. They just never realized the darkness was their own.